I'm Mary Roley, and this is my third year teaching at the Pecha School of the Arts. I mostly teach Art 109 3D concepts, but last spring I taught one section of Art 261, Intro to Sculpture. And I thoroughly enjoyed the last few years. I'm happy to share my work with you. I grew up on the rural edge of Madison, Wisconsin, and I've always been drawn to these agrarian landscapes and structures of the Midwest. My earliest memories of sculpture is learning to use them as landmarks to help navigate as a tether back to a familiar space. So navigation and sense of place are recurring themes in my work. Most of my sculptures reference places I've lived or visited, and I like to think of each sculpture as a coordinate on a map that tells a story. A farm noted only by a windmill or a silo tells a story of human existence and resilience. So buildings like barns, grain elevators, to me are signs of life with their tall stature over the land, yielding qualities of strength and reliability. Many of my sculptures speak to the interactions of humans with the land and their relationships to it, for better or for worse. So I often feel a sense of grief that as humans we don't have more meaningful interactions with the very land that sustains us, and I find this problematic. My journey to sculpture has been a circuitous one. My undergraduate school in Southern California didn't have a sculpture program, so I got a lot of my education by working in industrial settings. I had a great internship at Johnson Atelier in New Jersey pouring bronze sculptures, which got me hooked on metal. And then I also worked as a welder in a machine shop for many years before graduate school. I was first introduced to glass blowing in grad school, but didn't really hone those skills until I worked as a production glass blower for several years. I spent some time in New York blowing glass at both the Corning Studio and at Urban Glass in Brooklyn. And while I was in Brooklyn, I really fell in love with the old water towers that were on top of all the old buildings around the city, and actually learned to navigate the city by these water towers. So I love how these utilitarian structures are so essential to that unique sense of place in Brooklyn. To me, these mythic and beautiful structures are like silent guardians, and I imagine the people and the stories they've witnessed and contain. This sculpture is called Fanning the Flames. You turn a crank and it turns a fan blade and begins to rock back and forth and lights up a neon tube. And I think this piece is particularly relevant to our current political atmosphere with all the alarm bells going off all around us. Incidentally, the sculpture doesn't exist anymore. It tipped over one too many times. So as you can see, many of my sculptures take on human characteristics and attributes. And here's a more joyful human story. This pair is called Mama and Papa. Mama is on the right. But later in life, I wanted to get out of these industrial type settings. So I went back to school to study landscape architecture, which is still art related, but it gave me a great foundation in the natural sciences and really deepened my appreciation for sense of place and design of the built environment. For the past 10 years, I've worked in the field of landscape architecture, designing parks and playgrounds. But throughout it all, I've maintained a studio practice doing metalworking and glass blowing. And lately, I've returned to studies of just pure line and form. I've always admired those artists that can capture a story or gesture with just a few essential lines. So now I'm focusing on reducing elements in my sculptures to just the essentials. I've always wanted to teach, and as someone who did not have a sculpture program as an undergrad and got my sculpture education through various jobs, it was always a goal of mine to bring these experiences into the classroom to be a resource for students. So I am delighted to be at UW-M to share the knowledge that I have with you. And thank you so much to Carolyn for getting me reconnected to this meeting. Thank you, everyone.